Next up, our next talk, or our next speaker, Daniel Cornett. He's going to be talking on LSA-Reaper, a remote LSASS extraction tool. Let's welcome Daniel.
Thank you. Thank you for that. So, just want to thank everyone for coming out. Without further ado, I think we've got everyone right at time, so I'm going to go ahead and get started. My name is Daniel Cornett, and this is LSA-Reaper, a remote LSASS extraction tool. So, a little bit about me. I'm a recent graduate of the University of North Georgia, went through their cyber program, graduated with a Bachelor's of Science in Cybersecurity. I've been in the private field for about a year and a half, working at a really awesome consulting firm, Brickto Security. We have a booth right out in the hallway, so if you guys want to come see me after this for any questions, I'll be there the rest of the day. I do enjoy making tools. I pen test a lot of stuff, so I try and automate as much of it as I can. And I have passed the CEH and my GSEC. So, what is LSASS? LSASS is Windows' way to make using their operating system easier. It stands for Local Security Authority Subsystem Service, and it runs on every single operating system made by Microsoft. It stores your logon credentials, such as Kerberos credentials if you're on a domain, MSV, and wdigest. So it is a process. It runs on startup, and it holds those credentials because if you were to try and access, say, a file on your system, Windows needs to make sure that you have permission to open that file. And instead of prompting you for your password every time you open up a folder in a file, it will take those credentials that are stored in the LSASS process and use them instead. So some problems that I encountered while making this tool. It's pretty complex. Getting memory out of the LSASS process is not a super easy feat. There's a bunch of ways to do it. There's manual ways, there's built-in ways within Windows, but it is a pretty complex problem. Another thing is there's already some tools that do stuff like this, such as LSASS or Mimikatz. These tools have been around a lot longer, and they're a lot more well-known. So what can I do with LSA-Reaper to make it unique and make it stand out from the competition? So within making Reaper unique, there's already those tools, and I just need to find a way to do something that hasn't already been done. So here's a little bit of an overview of it. It's unique in the way that it uses an SMB share as its payload distribution and exfiltration point. It uses Impacket as its main running point, and for anyone that hasn't checked out Impacket, it's a great collection of tools. It's really good for internal pen tests if you're going to be doing that, and it's fully automated. You just give it some arguments, and it does everything for you. So, yeah, you can see that pretty well. These are some of the arguments. Starting off with, you can use it with other forms of Impacket, have it parse all the dump files for you. You can have it automatically validate any credentials that it pulls out that are MSV, and do a lot of stuff. If you're trying to, say, do a test where you want the client to be able to see in their logs a certain string, you can set the share name, the payload name. It's pretty user scalable and user configurable. It has multiple ways of authentication, either through Kerberos, not giving a password, using an NT hash, or a local account within a host so you don't have to specify it. And this is what my GitHub page has for it. So you get LSA-Reaper and a few other little Python scripts that I have made for it, mainly smbexec. I took that and I modified it in multiple ways. First off, the first one, smbexec modified, it is pretty much a clone of smbexec, except I've added in some of the issue fixes that are on their GitHub page that they just haven't done for some reason. smbexec multi allows you to run one command against multiple hosts, which the normal smbexec doesn't have, and I couldn't find it anywhere else. And smbexec shellless works in the same way as smbexec multi, except it is pointed at one host to execute command from just your command line without dropping you into a shell. So, is all this legal? Well, these are all the states where this is legal, and you do need permission, written permission from anyone. If you don't own that system, please only use this tool on systems you own or have permission to. It's for educational purposes. Don't get yourself arrested. So scaling the gap. Starting from the bottom, these are ways of dumping LSASS. So within Windows, there is a DLL called com.svcs.dll, and it is a signed Microsoft Windows binary that has a minidump function. But the big issue with this is an old technique. Everyone knows about it. Everything alerts on it. So the actual attack vector for that is pretty limited. Defender itself will actually block this attack, and it won't even give you a minidump. However, there's another way, procdump. This is a signed binary. It comes with the sysinternal suite of Microsoft, and with it, it is a exe that allows you to dump any process memory to a file. However, it's another old avenue. It's very well known, and it is heavily mitigated. So we come to minidump write dump. Now this is a function within Windows' debug help library. And what it does is it takes a process ID and a file handle, and you can put it just straight into a program, and it'll run that function and dump that process memory to a file. So part 2 of scaling the gap, I did go with this minidump write dump function. The one issue that it has is all LSASS dump files have a signature in a way that makes them very easily detectable by Windows Defender or most antiviruses, and it'll usually just get deleted immediately because it's a file that isn't normally on disk for any legitimate reason. So how can we get around this file detection? So as it turns out, if you mount a network share as a drive within a Windows machine, you can use that as a file handle to write straight to that share. And if it happens to be a Linux machine, that file won't get deleted, and Windows Defender won't even see it because it is on a network share, and Defender often doesn't scan those. So the next issue that we run into is automating this. So this tool is designed to be run up to hundreds, if not thousands of hosts without any user interaction. So how can we automate this? Using a Linux Samba share, we can spin that up as an SMB share on our attacker machine and have Windows hosts connect to it using the netuse command that's built into Windows. So as for payload delivery, most enterprises, which is what I use this tool for, have something called application whitelisting, which means you can't just take any old exe and run it. So we need to find a way to get around this protection. With every version of Windows 10 or newer, I believe, you have what's called MS Build. And with version 4.0 of .NET comes inline tasks. And what an inline task is a feature of MS Build that allows you to write out an XML file as a task and includes actual code written in C# within it, and it will execute that task in memory without compiling it. So this is a really good avenue for getting around application whitelisting because MS Build is a signed Windows binary, and it won't get blocked that often. So the same goes for register 32. This is a DLL within Microsoft Windows. I believe it comes on almost every version of Windows, and it allows you to install or uninstall certain DLLs of any given argument. So what we can do with this is create a DLL file that exports a function name. I believe it's called DLL register server, and register 32 will then use that exported DLL function as an entry point and execute any code within it. This is normally used within Windows for installing things. However, we can use it as a way of code execution. Up next, we have Windows 7 Calculator. So what a lot of people don't know is this version of Windows 7 Calculator is vulnerable to DLL sideloading, which is used kind of often by a recent attack from a malware group called Quackbot. This was being used a lot, and I picked up on it through the Windows 7 Calculator app into Ghidra to see what all it's importing for DLLs, and I took that DLL import, made it as a DLL export on a DLL, named it the correct thing, and then I stuck it as a DLL right next to it, so it'll sideload that DLL and execute our dumping code. And lastly, we just have a straight-up exe, so if they aren't using application whitelisting, this runs pretty easily. It's just an exe file that's compiled. So we have two kinds of payloads now. we have minidump, write dump, and like I explained earlier, this will dump the LSASS process's memory straight into a file, which we can parse for credentials later. This is a slightly known attack. It's picked up a lot. It's not often blocked, though, because many legitimate programs use this function for debugging. But another way we can do it is through PSS capture snapshot. And what PSS capture snapshot does is it takes a screenshot of that memory in whatever state it's in and writes it to another process, and then we can use minidump write dump to dump that new process that was created. Since it's not the LSASS process, most EDRs and antiviruses won't flag that as, hey, that's super malicious, that process is getting dumped, because within Windows, processes get dumped to a file quite often for crash logs, debugging, stuff like that. So here is an example video of the tool running. It is going to take a second to boot up because this VM network is set up to look like it has internet. It doesn't, so it's just sitting there timing out. But as we run it, I'm giving it a domain. My test domain is acme.local using the administrator account, and it's going to hit every host that has SMB open within it. It's going to prompt me for the admin's password, create a user, create a network share, and boom, it is already attacking those 3 hosts, and it's already done. So with that, it's going to parse those 3 files out into a couple files, and I don't want to validate those credentials because I already know they're going to be valid. So jumping into the directory, it gives us a lot of stuff. So within dumped msv.txt, it's basically just going to be your MSV credentials, domain, username, and an NT hash. And what an NT hash is it is a hash version of a user's password that can be used as an equivalent of the password. Up next, we have a greppable output. So this will have everything from your MSV to your Kerberos, your DP API keys. And dump to full.txt is just a pretty output. It's PyPyCat's default output type. And up next, we have dumped host. So this is just going to be a list of any hosts that returned a minidump file, which is good for if, say, you're doing this to 800 hosts and your clients want a list of those vulnerable hosts. So that's it for that quick little demonstration. But up next, we have some defenses for this. So by default, Windows does give you 2 really good avenues for protecting against this kind of attack. The first one being run as PPL. This is a registry key that you can create within your registry that will put the LSASS process into a protected state. So it stands for Run as Protected Process Lite. And there's 2 kinds. There's Protected Process and Protected Process Lite. In this case, the only way you can set it is Protected Process Lite, which means only another protected process or another protected process lite can access that memory space now. And with that, to get to that kind of level, you need kernel level access, which even if you have an administrator account, is very tricky to get to. And we also have Windows Credential Guard. So this can be turned on with a group policy, and what that does is it will store any LSASS credentials in a secure container within the Windows hypervisor, so nothing can access it. Once it's in that memory space, there's no way to get to it. So moving on, there are vulnerabilities within Run as PPL. So there's a few ones that have been seen, some userland exploits. The biggest one is using a vulnerable driver to gain access to the kernel level memory. And to do this, you need to know a little bit about how Run as PPL works. So, like I said, only another protected process lite or protected process can access that memory, but it also needs to have the same signer. So within Windows, there are multiple signer types. There's Windows TCB, but the ones that we're really looking at are PS Protected Signer Anti-Malware. This is used often by anti-malware solutions. And we also have PS Protected Signer LSA, which is what the LSASS process uses when it is put into that protected state. So if we were to somehow remove that protected process lite or from the LSASS process or add it to our tool that's running, we can then access that memory again. And so with that, there are some really good examples. In this case, it is using a vulnerable driver from MSI After Burner, a very commonly seen GPU overclocking tool that's been around for a while. And with that, you can access kernel level memory and set your own process to be a protected process. So here's a demonstration of that. We're first going to run without that run as PPL flag, so it will attempt to dump that memory, and we're going to get an access is denied because we don't have permission to read that memory, even though we're running as administrator. So it's going to timeout checking for updates. It's going to ask you for that password again, and it's going to set everything up. It does a fresh setup each time, and boom, immediately access is denied. We don't have access to read that memory. So you can see that there. That is a error that you will see when that process is running in a protected state or you are not running as administrator. So now we can give it a flag called run as PPL. It's going to do its update check and sit there for a while. But as this runs, it'll start up that driver, install it, and very easily it can be used. It can then be used for this attack. So it does give you a warning, hey, you're using kernel level memory. If something goes super bad, this can cause a blue screen. It hasn't happened yet, but it can. So this does take significantly longer because it has to install that driver, start up another process that will then interact with our process to set its signer type to PS Protected Process LSA and make it a Protected Process Lite. So once this is done running, we'll see we should get a very nice and easy dump file. And takes a little bit because it just runs and runs. And as we can see, the protection PPL LSA was set to our process ID. Previous was none. And we get a dump file even though that host is running run as PPL. So up next, we have Microsoft breaking things. Microsoft does as Microsoft do. They try to make things more secure, and they end up breaking things. So for some reason, between roughly 2 versions of Defender's security intelligence, it turned the minidump write dump function accessing LSASS into a denial of service for the file explorer process. Essentially what it would do is it would cause that process to hang, and for anyone that hasn't dug deep into Windows, file explorer is used for a lot of things. So if that process stops responding, a lot of things stop working. Here's a good example of what that looks like if you were logged in. So with Reaper, you don't have to run the 3 commands that it gives you from the tool itself. You can just have it print those 3 commands and run them. And as you can see, MS build is started, and everything just locked up immediately. This is the same payload that it's had for 4 months, and were shown in the same ones right before. But everything's locked up. If I try to go to, say, this PC, it's just sitting there hanging. It can't do anything. I can't even see my C drive. This has been fixed, thankfully. Haven't seen it in a while, but this was an issue for a little bit. So, questions? Yes, sir.
About how long have you spent developing?
I started developing this about a year ago. It took a couple days to get it actually working or have the core components working, and it's just been adding quality of life features ever since. Any other questions? Yes, ma'am.
Is LSA-Reaper easy to use for beginners, or is it something that only those who know how to code is?
Yeah. So with LSA-Reaper, it's out of the box. It'll work. You just have to install some dependencies, and there's a setup script for that. The biggest thing is if you're using this in a pen test, you have to have administrator credentials to a machine, and those aren't always the easiest to get. But if you're just using it in a home lab type scenario, it's pretty easy to use. You just need a Linux machine and a Windows machine. It doesn't even have to be on a domain. All right. Any other questions? Sir.
So looking at the functions and stuff, the fact that it's using kind of Impacket and its associated functions, do you find that EDRs and other solutions are not picking that up? Because I know that it's pretty easy to catch Impacket.
Yeah. So I have used this against 3 of the big EDRs, SentinelOne, CrowdStrike, Carbon Black. All 3 of them do detect it. I've seen all 3 of them stop it, so that is really good. Things like Microsoft Defender for Endpoint sometimes stop it, sometimes they don't. It's a bit hit or miss. Defender itself recently started picking up the wmiexec method, and I found that if you change the share that it uses by default from admin to C, it stops picking it up. So your newer EDRs, yeah, they are pretty good at stopping this, but if your company's just running, say, like Windows Defender stock endpoint protection, you can usually get away with this. All All right, anyone else? Sir.
What's the biggest difference between, like, I'm not smart on very Impacket,
Yeah.
like secret stuff or
Yeah. So Secret Stump is a tool made by Impacket. It does something similar to what LSA-Reaper does. However, it doesn't go for the LSASS process. It goes for LSA secrets and the SAM hive, which are registry hives within Windows that contain your local users' credentials. And LSA secrets, you can find anything from cache credentials, from domain cache credentials, to, say, clear text passwords. You won't ever get a username and an NT hash for a logon session from Secret Stump. Get NP users stands for get no pre-authentication users, and that is a tool for checking if a account has Kerberos pre-authentication set. And if you do not require Kerberos pre-authentication, you can request that user's username and encrypt it, an encrypted password for an AS rep hash, take that offline into Hashcat and crack it. So that just interacts with the domain controller rather than individual hosts. Sorry? Okay. Sweet. So, any other questions? All right. I'll be here all day. If you guys want to stop by our booth and ask me any questions afterwards, be happy to. I do have some prizes to give out for the questions, so I will give those out here in a second. But thank you all for coming out.